Hello and welcome to Long Range Sensors, the show where we choose an episode from the vast library of Star Trek to reminisce and discuss. Today on Long Range Sensors, we're picking up an episode from The Next Generation, Season 2, Where Silence Has Lease. And this episode was brought to you with the generous support of Cosmic, Leewaz, Sonu, and Minipacks, who are our first 4 founding members over on Patreon. Thank you to all of you. You are totally amazing. If you want to find out how you can support the show and also get exclusive benefits, you can visit patreon.com/Long Range Sensors, or stick around after the show and you'll find out more as well. So I'm Trev, I'm based in London, and joining me from across the Atlantic in Canada is Big Daddy Cool himself, Alistair. Hey, Alistair.
Hello, Trev.
What are you laughing at? What's so funny?
Oh, I've never been introduced as Big Daddy Cool before. That's amazing. That's awesome.
I don't believe that. Just looking at you, that is Big Daddy Cool right there.
Oh.
So to start off, we're actually going to go over some Trek lifestyle and some Trek news stories, much like we did in the last episode. I think it's a great way to warm up before we dive into the episode itself. So Al, have you got any updates you want to share?
Yeah, well, we're now finally on all of the big podcasting services. So wherever you're listening to this, there's other options for you now as well. So in addition to being able to listen directly through our website, we're now on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, we're even on YouTube as well. And so if you're listening on one of those services, but another one is better suited to you, you can grab us from there as well.
There is actually one thing that I would like to mention as well. Another YouTube channel recently called Trexpertise, literally a few days ago, did their top 10 Star Trek countdowns on both the movies and the TV shows. I'm not going to go through and we're not going to commentate on exactly what was said, but I want you to get, what do you think was number one out of the Trek TV shows? Just let's just see.
Are we doing like of the shows or episodes from shows?
It was the shows themselves, so entire series. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a feeling that Next Generation is probably going to be number one.
No, it wasn't actually. Do you want to know where that was?
Was it Deep Space Nine?
So yeah, Deep Space Nine was number one, and Next Generation number 2.
That actually makes me happy, in all honesty, because it's one of those things. I love Next Generation. I mean, we discussed last episode. It's what we grew up with.
Yes.
I think that Deep Space Nine is a much richer show. There is so much more in the writing and the characters and things. And I do think that overall it is a far better show, with some dark moments, but also some of the funniest moments in Star Trek too. And I think there's so many top 10 lists where Next Generation is immediately put at the top because of all the nostalgia there. And it definitely deserves to be right up by the top. But I am glad to hear that Deep Space Nine has taken that top spot.
Yeah, I mean, it should definitely be up there in any sort of Star Trek, list of best shows, the entire franchise. I mean, we're not going to go into what our top 10 is of any of that stuff just yet. I don't think we've earned that yet. Have we, making an episode on that? I'm sure we'll get to it at some point and annoy everybody. Hopefully make a few people happy as well when we get around to it. But it's just really, really, really interesting how Deep Space Nine, it does often end up near the top when perhaps when it started, I don't think it got that same, when it was on air, didn't really get that recognition.
It was ahead of its time.
Yes.
In terms of the way that they did storytelling, which is more common with how things are now. So I think it's easier for people to get into Deep Space Nine now, just because the television landscape has changed so much since then.
Exactly. It's more like a current show, isn't it, really? The way the show series is structured, the sort of having long storylines that are constantly going on in the background, that's fairly what every show is like these days, isn't it?
Exactly. And also it was the first show that wasn't set on a starship.
Yeah.
Which was a very big departure. I mean, it was enough of a departure just not having Kirk and Spock and McCoy, when Next Generation came out, to suddenly have it
Yeah.
on a station where they boldly just stay put was a
Yeah.
very jarring experience for a lot of people when it first arrived.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to cover, Deep Space Nine episodes. We'll probably have one coming up within the next few episodes. So stay tuned for that. But what we're going to focus on for the next segment is one thing that, again, was part of our childhoods when we grew up, with Star Trek in the 90s, late 80s and 90s. And well, it hasn't stopped, I would say. It's something that continues to this day. And it was one thing that fascinated me when I was a kid without actually becoming directly involved with them or actually buying them or even making them a lot because I was probably too young. But Star Trek model kits.
Mm.
Um, so, they were pretty common in the 90s. They were quite easy to get in toy shops and things like that. I mean, Al, what was your experience with model kits? Have you made them? Have you bought them? Do you still do that?
So yeah, I had I've had some model kits, but model kits wasn't really something that I was that into. I did get one as a gift one Christmas, and it was the Klingon Bird of Prey, and it was interesting because you
Oh,
could
cool.
choose which whether it was in an attack position or in a flight position, which was kind of neat. But obviously, it's stuck in whichever mode you put it in. And I remember making that and painting it, and just finding that one, it took a lot longer than I had patience for at that age, and also I wasn't very good at the painting side of things. And I got some models later on. I got the Ambassador class USS Enterprise C, but and that was
That's a
a
great,
snapped
great.
yeah that was a snap together
Right.
kit as well.
Yeah.
So I was able to snap that together, and then I just didn't bother to do much else with it really.
That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it was the paint job that would make or break a model kit. You could build the thing, but if the paint didn't do it, it would look a bit naff, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's always been one of those things which that experience of building and painting the Bird of Prey has made me scared of painting other things because I've always been I've got a lot of board games and they come with miniatures, and there's some amazing paint jobs that people have done, and I always just kind of think I would love to be able to paint these as well, but I know that the moment I do, if I screw it up, then they look terrible and they're ruined for life.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I've got Star Trek Ascendancy, and there's just tons of Starship models, and I've seen people who've painted those and painted the star bases, and they look great. And it's just like I don't want to ruin them. I'm more happy just keeping them as the little resin and plastic pieces that they are without painting them.
At least you know that it could be put together at some point to look perfect. Instead of doing it and cocking it up. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe one day I'll just pay somebody to do it. Contract them in to paint my models.
yeah.
So how about you? How about yourself then? Was that something that you grew up with quite a lot then?
I remember. I think my most vivid memories of Star Trek model kits is probably I remember going into a comic shop. I grew up in sort of a seaside town in Essex, and the largest sort of town near to me was a place called Colchester, and that had a
Mm.
comic shop in it called Ace Comics, and it's still going to this day. Funny enough, I went into this comic shop when I was visiting my parents, and I actually had a day where I went with my girlfriend to Colchester, and I was like. And they'd moved from where they used to be in within the town. But I went into the comic shop. It's still the same. It's still the same owner. I actually got chatting to the owner. I was actually looking for some Star Trek and Transformers comics in there, funnily enough. And This is the place where I used to get a lot of my American comics. And yeah, I started chatting to the owner, and I was like, "Oh, I used to come into your shop." And he was like, "Oh, when?" And I was like, "When I was like 10." So we're looking at pushing 20, 25, 30 years nearly. And he was like, "God, I feel old now." It's the same. It was the same dude. But yeah, I used to go into this shop, and I was like I said, 9, 10, 11 years old, and
Mm.
it had a lot of nerdy, geeky sci-fi stuff alongside. No, its main focus was comics, but it would have the things that would be around that as well, like the action figures and things. And so there was model kits, and I remember seeing the Star Trek model kits. And this was at a point before Playmates started making Star Trek toys. So there
Yeah.
wasn't really, you couldn't really get an Enterprise like toy that you could play with. There were like little knick-knacky things that were floating around. There was like, there was like, I remember that weird like metal, like die-cast metal Enterprise that was from Star Trek 5, which I got.
Mm.
I had.
I had the Dinky Toys one as well
Yeah.
that had little discs that you'd put in and you spin the bridge around and it would fire them as like torpedoes out the very front.
Oh God, the original series Enterprise. Yeah, I had
That's
that.
it.
Yeah, my dad there was some like vintage toy shop in Leicester when I was still in Leicester because I moved to Essex when I was young. But I was, born in Leicester. Spent my very early years in Leicester, and there was another comic shop called The Final Frontier. Wonder where they got that name from. And it had in the window, it had like that Enterprise. Like they obviously had some secondhand toys in there as well. My dad, remember, went like berserk when he saw it. It was, oh my God, like that. I remember that being out, that Enterprise. He would have been, I think, he would have been too old for him to have bought that and played with himself because, in the early 70s, I think when that came out, I think he would have been already in his late teens.
Mm.
I thought, oh God, that's so cool. I want that. I want that. And I was like, 6, 7 years old at the time. My dad got it for me, so I had that, and it had a shuttlecraft, I think, that came out the bottom.
Yeah,
Really inaccurate because it didn't come
yeah.
out the bottom.
But it did allow it to stand on its own though, with the doors open.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you just opened the doors, didn't you? Yeah, and you could sort of stand it, but it looked pretty good, really, and it looked pretty. I wouldn't say it was super accurate, but it looked like the Enterprise. It had NCC 1701 on the top and Enterprise on the top. But yeah, there wasn't really.
It was as accurate as we had it back then.
Yeah, exactly. Without getting a model kit,
Yeah.
So there wasn't really any toys of note then. Nothing like what we would get from Playmates in the early mid-90s.
Yeah.
So the only thing you had really, if you wanted to have some kind of a replica of a ship, would be a model kit, and it was like AMT, I think, were the people that made the model kits. I think
yeah. And I still remember going into a store because it was a similar experience for myself as well. That I went to a shop in Manchester. I sadly cannot recall the name of it, but it was a sci-fi store that was right next to a bookstore that my father would go to. So he would go into this bookstore, I would go next door. So we kind of part ways at that point. I go into the sci-fi store and they would have all sorts of stuff. And most of the stuff that was in there was model kits. And they had a couple of ships from different series and different models and things hanging from the ceiling, but they did have a couple of Star Trek ships there as well. But I just remember kind of looking at this wall of just AMT boxes with pictures of like the USS Excelsior on the side, or the Miranda class and so on.
The actual artwork on the box was beautiful as well, wasn't it? Like painted kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it's always one of those things where it's like, I wish I was I was good enough, decent enough to do these things justice. Because the box art was beautiful. The models, when they're done properly, are fantastic, and some of the demo models that they had on display were brilliant. Sadly, that shop does not exist anymore. They were, unfortunately, one of the ones caught in the blast during the IRA bombings of Manchester.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so yeah, and I would imagine that the insurance probably didn't cover that, and especially with the kind of stuff that like stock that they had when you're dealing with collectibles, that's not an easy thing to restock. So my understanding is that they more likely just went out of business because they never reopened. So my favorite sci-fi store as a kid was blown up by terrorists.
Kind of a sad ending there at the end.
But they had some fantastic Starship models in there at the time before that happened.
Yeah, well, at least you got to see them, I suppose, at some
point.
That's
it, yeah. And it's still one of those fond memories of going into the store, that knowing that, I wouldn't really buy anything from there. I was too young anyway, but it was just to be able to go in and just marvel at what was available, when it wasn't like everywhere, because it was just before we started seeing stuff popping up in Toys R Us and filling those shelves with that kind of stuff. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I had that comic shop. They had the model kits, but the stronger sort of memory of like, oh my God, these are cool, was there was another shop in the same town in Colchester called BT's, which is a toy. I think they were a franchise, and there was some BT's toy shops scattered around the UK. This is one of them.
Familiar.
Yeah, kind of a yellow background with a blue, with sort of block, sort of capital black text, I think was their sort of logo. And they sold everything. They had like video games, action figures. But yeah, they had like model railway and model kits. like Airfix aeroplanes and stuff, but they had Star Trek model kits. And I remember going in there and just being in awe of the ones that were hanging from the ceiling, the ones that had been built. Obviously, someone that worked there was maybe into the models, and he would
Hmm.
build them. But my favorite, basically my favorite Star Trek ship ever is the refit USS Enterprise, and
Hmm.
from the original series films. So well, that and the 1701A, they're kind of both the same thing. So I would see that someone had built that and had it hung, and it looked amazing. He got the paint was absolutely perfect. It was the right color. Even put some like faint, like sort of wear, like almost like not quite battle damage, like not like big huge scorch marks or anything, just like a faint bit of like wear that made it look just really cool. And I just wanted one so badly. I remember I used to like absolutely like nag the crap out of my dad, especially to get me one. But he would obviously, quite rightly tell me like, look, I can't get it for you because you won't be able to build it. And and they were cheap. They were like sort of probably 20, £30 in
Hmm.
those days. Probably maybe double that in today's money. But yeah, so they weren't like sort of a casual thing you could just casually buy. But I remember he did cave in at one point because my dad was into models. He wasn't like a big model kit builder, but he would do the odd one like aeroplane and things every
Hmm.
now and then. And I managed to persuade him to get the Excelsior, one of the AMT model kits. So we got the Excelsior and we built it. And I think I helped him to build it, but we couldn't paint it and we didn't have the right paint. So it was kind of a bit crap. It was like very pasty because we kind of didn't really give it an undercoat of like, you're supposed to give it like an underlayer coat, aren't you, of the actual
Hmm.
base color of the ship. And then you sort of paint over the sort of details on that. I might be wrong. Sorry to anybody who's awesome at these model kits and I've just like blasphemed. But yeah, there's a way of doing it basically. We put the decals on mostly fairly well. They were very tricky to put on though. But like we did some things like we painted like the sort of the nacelles, like the bits that would light up in like the TV series and the movies, like the middle part of the nacelles. We painted that red when it should be kind of blue, so it looked a bit crap. But yeah, I really loved having it though. I thought it was absolutely awesome. But we didn't
Yeah.
really get any others. 'Cause I think probably that we're getting that one and we're seeing how we didn't quite, live up to what we hoped it would look like. And I've dipped in and out of it, since then. Like now, there's actually quite a lot of model kits like now, but like I see like AMT made that the Enterprise, the Refit Enterprise or the Enterprise A. I'm just going to call it the Enterprise A from this point on. I think they've been making that one model kit since like the motion picture, and they just knocked it out. Every time there was a movie would come out, they would knock out an update of that model kit. So there's like a Star Trek 5 edition that came out when Star Trek 5 come out. There's like a Star Trek 6 edition. And actually, I've looked on eBay like a few times over the last few years, and there's often sealed set like sealed model kits of the Enterprise A. That's of the Star Trek 5 one, especially in the Star Trek 6 one. Mostly from America, but they're quite cheap. So I might actually. I know you can get modern versions, but I just want to get one of those original ones that I really wanted when I was a kid. And I think the modern ones are just the same mold. I don't think they've really mucked with it too much. Um, I can't
Yeah.
remember who it is that makes them these days, but I think they've just bought the molds off AMT, or maybe AMT still do it. I don't really know, but I think they're the same anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a friend of mine called Chris who has been making a ton of these models. They're absolutely fantastic. I've got some pictures that I'm going to share with you. And for anybody who visits our website, longrangensensors.com, you'll see it in the show notes as well. So
Yeah.
these are just some of the images here. But he's basically been working for a while on
Oh wow, looks
the
amazing.
refit Enterprise. Yeah, it's a 1:350 scale. This one's from Polar Lights, and
Yeah, that's
it's
the ginormous one, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely humongous. And like there's a whole internal bit for the hydroponics bay. You can see right through the shuttle bay into the expanded shuttle bay that they had in the film and stuff. It's incredible work, and the amount of detail that has to go into the hull, because there's all the Aztecing. So the Aztecing is this kind of like offset to make it look like there's all these
Yeah.
panels, that's what it's all assembled with. And in the motion picture, it was extremely prominent, where it had this kind of shine and sheen to it. And so when you kind of angle the ship to the light, you can see all this Aztecing. And so when he was sending me all these pictures
Yeah.
as he was producing it, there's little bits of tape that he's had to put over everything before he spray paints. And so we're talking like layers and layers of this stuff. And it's absolutely incredible. He's then got, this was one of the later ones he did. He had a bunch of models that were 1 to 1400 scale. So basically every single ship that he had was all in scale with each other. So you could really kind of get a sense as to which are the big ships, which are the small ships. You know, so he's just got this massive collection of all different types of classes of ships and stuff. And I was asking him what it was like doing this massive 1 to 350 scale compared to all the others. And he was saying that the smaller models you can kind of get away with when you're using a paintbrush because any paintbrush marks aren't noticeable. The larger ones you are having to spray paint. So that was a new skill for him to learn. And he also said it could be largely just be down to fitting the lighting kit and interiors, but for him personally, the biggest challenge with the larger model was the stamina, trying to just get the whole thing finished. After so long, you get sick to the back teeth of it. You just want the damn thing finished, which makes you want to rush certain aspects. Then you aren't happy with the finish, which leads to an even greater frustration. And that's definitely something that I could resonate with, that the larger the model goes, the less chance there would be of me getting the willpower to push through. You know, and he was saying that the larger models you have to pace yourself, you know, and split it into stages and have a decent break between those stages. And he still got the nacelles to fully attach and a load of decals to still put on. So he's managed to wire up the nacelles to it, but they're still not physically like attached properly. But to give you a sense of the scale, this is a model that is about an inch under 3 foot. So it's a pretty big model for it as well.
That's not too far removed from the actual studio model then.
Yeah. It's because it was what, like a 4 or 5 foot model I think they were using on the
I think so.
for those.
Yeah, it was around that, yeah, so I never really, I was too young really to sort of really go into it and you know, build one. But not long after that, Playmates got the rights to Star Trek toys, so we got a nice set of starships that came out of that. Then really good Enterprise D, which I got, and I used to played with like to absolutely went crazy playing with that thing. It was awesome. And it had sound effects.
Did you have the original release or did you have the Generations release?
I had the original release. So it had like
nice.
bells lit up. The Generations one had like sort of scorch marks on the hull, didn't it? And the hull kind of could break up.
Yeah, that's the one that I had. So you push little buttons at the very front of the saucer section, and these 2 panels would pop off, and you get little red flashing lights underneath to kind of show damage, and that was cool, and I really liked that. But just for general use, it always felt kind of odd with all the scorch marks that were permanently there. And so when I was playing as a kid, I always had to just kind of imagine that the scorch marks weren't there.
Yeah.
You know, until I wanted to have damage.
I remember seeing it in like a toy shop. I think I would have already had the. I think I got like that Playmates Enterprise Day. That was about 92, 93. When it comes.
That makes sense. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally, probably when their first wave of things they brought out, I think, potentially. I got a whole load of their stuff. I got like the transporter room. I got a bunch of the figures. But anyway, yeah. There's a whole toy sort of thing we could go into. But I remember when I saw that Generations version, I was like, what's that supposed to represent in the film? And I was like, oh, yeah, it's when it like blows up or something. I was like, well, it isn't like it just blows up in one big explosion. Oh, well, I got the saucer, I guess, detaches and crashes into like Viridian 3. But it doesn't really sort of have bits come off it or anything. It kind of, that, you know, you're a nitpicky sort of Trekkie when you think those sort of things, but that's probably why I didn't watch it, because it just wasn't reflective of, you know, what happened to it particularly. Cool gimmick for a toy, but yeah, I want my stuff.
And they were definitely kind of at that point where gimmicky, like they were going for gimmicks. Like I still, I mean, we're going way off topic now, but like Batman toys, you'd have Batman, which would have all sorts of, like you'd have him in scuba diving gear,
different colors.
You know, there'd just be
yeah.
That's it. You know, ones with a karate chop action and all this kind of stuff. There'd always be some gimmick. And it's just like, no, I just want I just want the default. I want it vanilla, and then I can imagine all the other things
Yeah,
and kind of go from there rather
yeah.
than being forced into this one little gimmicky thing. So that was always a thing there. The Playmates though they did come up with the Enterprise E for First Contact, and it was based on early design. So the nacelles, like the Bussard collectors, which are the red bits at the very front of the warp nacelles, are the wrong shape because that was based on original sketch work design that they did during pre-production before they kind of changed. But those were already set for Playmates, so
I think I weirdly picked that up quite a few years later, like when I was already like in my 20s, I think. So I remember picking that up because I thought, oh, I wonder if I get some of those other Playmate ships that I wanted because they were a cool way to get because they were pretty good, for the most part, despite obviously that
mm,
they would make mistakes. But if you didn't want a model kit, you wanted something a bit more robust, but still
which was me
looking,
as a kid. Yeah.
yeah, and have a good looking display piece. They still held up as pretty good, like items to have. And I think, yeah, I've got the Enterprise. I had the Enterprise Playmates Enterprise B, and for general,
Mm.
they made an Enterprise B as well. I think I sold it in the end. But I got it brand new off eBay. Again, I was well into my 20s. This isn't like when I was a little kid. Didn't know it was out when I was a little kid. But I think I paid like not much. I think 50 or 60 quid. I think I got it from the US actually, imported, and it looked really good. Like again, it lit up and did some stuff. It had some battle damage on it, which was actually kind of accurate to what happens to it in the film. And I was just on display and like where I was living at the time. It looked cool. But when we got to like the 2000s, so again, like this is when we were sort of hitting our 20s, and
Mm.
by that point, like I think Art Asylum had got the rights to a lot of Star Trek, to make Star Trek toys and sort of,
Oh, they.
yeah,
I have some of their ships. They are absolutely gorgeous in design.
they're beautiful, yeah.
They're just as big as the Playmates ones, but with so much more detail.
Yeah, it kind of took it was great because when I saw them, I was like, oh wow, this is exactly what I wanted in terms of like a model kit, but I don't have to build it, and it still looks really,
That's it. That's it. And they
yeah,
have lights and sounds and stuff. It's
yeah,
it's almost like the midway between you've got one end of the scale, you have like the AMT and Polar Lights model kits, and then on the other end of the scale, you've got the Playmates. And it just kind of sits somewhere nicely in the middle,
yeah,
as a perfect balance between the two.
yeah. And I got like it must have been about 2005, six. I think it was the 25th anniversary of Star Trek 2. So yeah, 2006, I think. 2005, 2006. And they did the refit Enterprise. And I thought, God, I've got to get that. They're not quite as big as the AMT model kits. I think they're 22 inches for the Enterprise. This is like about 16. It
Yeah.
looks gorgeous. It's got like battle damage on it that's kind of accurate to the film. Lights up. It's got really the Aztecings on the hull. It's painted beautifully. It's just as good as like a really well put together model kit, except it's a bit smaller, but yeah, it looks great. I mean, the only thing annoying about it is the stands are terrible. They're super flimsy.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that they have like the a bit like Playmates did. They had like a stand that's kind of the shape of the Delta
Yes,
insignia,
yeah,
but they sit on a ball joint, which is great in some respects because you can adjust the angle that you want it to be displayed at, but they do not hold very well. There's a lot of weight on them and they will just shift and
yeah,
eventually topple over. And that's a problem that I've had a couple of times.
absolute nightmare. And they're a nightmare to get on and off.
Oh, God, yeah, yeah. Just separating them, you feel like you're going to snap the thing in two,
Exactly, yeah,
which wasn't so because there was always that kind of with the Playmates toys is that they had a panel that the stand was attached to, which covered the battery pack,
yeah, that's
and you would
right.
slide it off, and then you'd have one that didn't have the stand attached. So you had two different ones, and then you would just replace them. And I would just keep the one that like is just the flat panel underneath the stand,
Yeah,
or buy it somewhere, and so you can switch it between it display and playing. Yeah.
yeah. There was no issue like wobbly or breaking. The Playmates ones were like rock solid. They were great.
They were like for kids, especially like
Yeah,
the amount of abuse that those kids stand up to, especially when the Enterprise D. I mean, those Galaxy class ships, the way that they're designed, they're not supposed to look very structurally sound because
yeah,
it's supposed to be in space.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, those were rock solid.
Yeah, and like the Art Asylum couldn't do that at all. I mean, I think there was someone on eBay that was selling like replacement stands, especially for Art Asylum. I need to get one because that refit Enterprise that I've got, that the stand broke years ago, and I haven't managed to be able to. I haven't got a replacement since. I really need to do it because it's just It's just upside down on top of my wardrobe. I'm looking at it right now, looking quite sad. It's in good condition. I mean, actually, it's good. God, it's like 12, 13 years old now. It still looks great. It literally broke the top chunk of it broke of the stand, and it literally toppled it over. But it didn't like snap. The ship is really strong. It's still intact. But I've got other Art Asylum ones. They improved those stands later. I've got the Enterprise E and B and a Klingon bird of prey, and those stands are great. I haven't had any problems with those at all. So part of me's thinking maybe I'll just grab the. I mean, later on they did it at the Enterprise A, which again is nigh and identical to the refit Enterprise. Just I think they just painted it slightly differently, and just have battle damage, and it's obviously got 1701A on it. So I think that's still fairly readily available. So yeah, I might try and pick one of those up. But a lot of this stuff with Art Asylum, I think I have to sort of get it from the States. I'm not sure were super easily available. Although in saying that, I can get, if I really want, I think if I get the Starships collection, I think they did like an Enterprise A, like in their larger scale. I don't know if that's the same.
They did, yeah. They did an XL for it. But I remember I was talking to one of my friends, and he was saying how the XL version wasn't as good. The paintwork, the design around the saucer was completely wrong and inaccurate and things. So,
oh, really?
Whilst it is a larger model, just the smaller standard model was a lot more accurate.
Yeah,
in terms of how it looked. So there's some XL models which Eagle Moss have done, which are just fantastic. Quality and detail is just exactly what you would want, but the XL one just didn't live up to standards, sadly.
Oh, so maybe I should go with that then.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Metal Earth model kits as well?
Yeah, aren't they literally are they the ones that are like? I'm going to open it actually now. Have a look at them. I see you've pinged me the link there. Yeah, I see them quite often in craft shops, but I've never seen a real one. Or I just see like obviously the box, and are they actually really good? I mean, they look good.
I was sent some over a couple of Christmases for my mother. So they're just a metal sheet, and you kind of pop out the pieces, which is a lot harder than it actually sounds. I had to get tools specifically just to try and do this. And I got the Klingon Vulture class battle cruiser.
Oh.
And I've also got the Enterprise D and the original Enterprise. I've only built the Klingon one. And on their website, they list that as challenging. And yeah, that I would say it is.
Really?
It takes a lot of patience. You're having to use pliers to bend metal into certain shapes and hope to God that nothing snaps.
Yeah.
The stands are the same material, so it can be a little on the flimsy side. But it was one of those things where I think I did it over the course of a week or two, just little bits here and there. And I was actually really satisfied with how it was at the end of it. I mean, it's just metal origami, really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking right now. They've got the T Endo, and which looks, obviously that's perfect for that sort of thing. It is metal. So yeah, that's one that I'm looking at. That's cool. Yeah.
The Enterprise D is marked as moderate, and I decided to go with the Vulture class because that looked to me like it didn't say that on the packaging, but the Vulture class looked easier in a way because I thought, how am I going to do like the saucer section?
Yeah.
And the fact that there's so many curves on the Enterprise D. But according to their website, that's supposed to be an easier one. So I think I'll do that before I go to the more challenging original series Enterprise, which has to be because of the deflector dish.
Yeah, that's right.
More than likely. So that's something that I'll do at some downtime when I finally get some. But they are certainly an interesting alternative when it comes to model kits where there's no painting involved at all.
Which is always good for people like us.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I will always just look in awe at people who can paint models brilliantly. That's just, it's not me. I just haven't had the time or the training. And if I start now, then I might be good by the time I retire. Okay. But I almost feel like it's something that you're going to need to start earlier on in life to have that time to kind of get to that level.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's never too late, but I'll probably stick to the Art Asylum ones, I think. Hopefully they'll keep them. People like us can get those. But talking of the Enterprise D, we actually have to talk about an episode that ship is in, don't we, Al? What are we actually going to talk about?
That would be the season 2 episode West Silence Has Lease. Season 2, episode 2.
It is indeed. That's a hell of a lot of twos.
It's two twos.
It's two twos indeed. Two squared.
Maths.
Two squared. So we obviously just both of us, watched the episode to recap and jog our memories. I do remember we like watching it back in the day, and watching it again, literally just before we came on to record the show. It's a really good episode. I mean, is it? What are your sort of thoughts on it, Al?
It is good, though it's a lot shorter than I remember. I mean, well, it's still the same length. It's still like a 45-minute episode, but it feels like less happened than I recall.
Yeah.
And it's oddly one of the ones which I don't go back to very often, which is why it was actually quite enjoyable to go back to it again. But I mean, that's quite common with a lot of the season 2 episodes.
Yeah, it's not generally season 2. Well, it's there are huge signs in it, I would say, that things are getting better. I mean, obviously one is Riker's got a beard, which is obviously one of the greatest ever.
Almost a necessity at that point.
Yeah. Although if you watch the previous episode, I mean, I don't want to talk about it too much, so I'm sure we'll talk about it in its own episode, but the previous episode.
The child.
The child, yeah. If you look at Riker then, you can see he hasn't had that beard long, because they've just come back from probably hiatus, and this is the first episode, of course. So he would have just grown that beard recently. And you can tell that there's kind of a half babyface Riker. Babyface Riker being obviously the first season Riker when he didn't have a beard. But that would come back to scare everybody in Star Trek Insurrection, but that's for another episode. You see like a half babyface Riker and a half bearded Riker, and you can kind of really see that because it just isn't as grown, because beards take time to grow, as both of us have beards and we know what that's like. In this one, he basically looks like he does for the rest of the series. Kind of an odd thing for me to notice, but yeah, that's one thing that I noticed about this episode. It's the first time he looks like he would normally look.
It's where the beard has come into its own. It's finally reached that stage of development.
Exactly. Yeah.
There is some interesting continuity from the child, because even though Star Trek was episodic, they were trying their hand at continuity and things. At the very end, he mentions that they would be going to the Morgana Quadrant, and that's where this episode takes place.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, which is a really neat continuity between the two. And and it's often overlooked that there was actually story arcs that they were putting into those early seasons. With it being all in syndication, it just never really kind of got the kind of level of attention that latest shows like Deep Space Nine would go on to have.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't really touch upon things like I remember that there's certain like bits of Star Trek when they directly follow from another episode, especially when it's episodes that aren't necessarily connected in a single story, that I really notice it. Like one example is The Gift, which is the second episode of season 4 of Voyager. It literally directly carries on from the previous episode, which is Scorpion Part 2, in the sense that it's the episode's teaser is literally 7 of 9 in her regeneration chamber, still fully as a Borg, and they obviously they sort of wake her up, I think, and I can't remember exactly what, but again we'll do an episode on it, so I'll rewatch at that point. Like, this is me remembering from like the last time I just watched it casually. And I was like, oh, well, they actually sort of made a point of like following on from the last episode.
Well, Brothers did the same after Best of Both Worlds in Next Generation.
Yeah.
So there were times when they would do that, but it's kind of neat seeing a lot of the undercurrents of things that were kind of being thrown in here and there in the first couple of seasons that you almost kind of forget about as the show kind of goes on and leaves a lot of those threads behind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Next Generation, obviously, it is more of that traditional Star Trek format where it's just individual like episodes. There might be some very faint ongoing threads in the background, but nothing.
Hmm.
You could dive in on it on any on. You could pick up any episode. You'll be able to watch it and enjoy it with no real prior knowledge of what might have happened
Hmm.
in the previous years. Really, right? Yeah.
It has a really weird opening, though, this episode.
Quite random, isn't it? Quite random.
Yeah, because Picard steps out of his ready room, and then it's as though he's it's almost like going into a room and forgetting why you entered. So he's coming out of the ready room, going onto the bridge, and then he kind of stops and almost as though he's going to turn back into there. So it's kind of like, why did I step onto the bridge?
Yeah.
Which is just a really odd thing. And then Troy just picks up that he's worried and concerned.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he's worried about what's happening with Worf and Riker. And it appears that they're on a tropical planet, which we later find out isn't actually the case.
It looks like a generic evil planet.
Yeah, and they're getting attacked by a couple of monsters. There's a giant armadillo that's got a giant gauntlet type glove, and then there's also Skeletor comes and attacks them as well.
Well, Michael Westmore did the Skeletor makeup in the Masters of the Universe movie. So he just redid that.
Did he?
Whatever dude was playing Skeletor in that bit. Yeah, it was Michael Westmore did the makeup on that film.
I did not realize that he had done that. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then after Worf has taken them both out, he's then got this bloodlust and goes after Riker before Riker goes, okay, we need to end the simulation. And it's on the holodeck.
Yeah. I don't think I can't remember the very first time I saw it. To be honest, it might have been when it was on BBC. It might have actually been when it was on Sky. Like the last episode I was telling you about how it was on every day on Sky. It was more likely then, to be honest, in the mid-90s. When I probably first...
this would have been 91 for us. 1988 for those of you in the US. And possibly other territories as well. But
yeah. I don't think I was fooled by that scene. I think I knew they were on the holodeck because we knew Picard knew about it. But then that kind of begs the question, so Picard knows they're doing a holodeck calisthenics thing, but so why? So he's like worried about it. Is he worried like they'll just get the safeties off? Like, is he worried like Worf will cut?
That's it
or something? Or
it's not clear as to why he's so concerned.
Yeah.
It really isn't. It's really just let's try and make it seem like they're in danger on some planet. And then that danger's gone. And there's no reference to it later on.
No.
There's no follow-up to it. Just everything's okay. And they're just now going on to their next mission.
It does establish that Riker and Worf do have kind of a friendship. They do sort of touch upon further down the series. And this is probably where the root of that begins. And maybe they're sort of foreshadowing Riker's interest in kind of Klingon culture and stuff, which sort of pays off right when he actually serves on a Klingon ship for a bit. But
that's a good point, actually. Yeah
I don't know if that was the intention. I could have completely made that.
It might be. And I think it's also that the character of Worf was really split between Worf and Tasha initially, so this is really Worf kind of coming more into his own for the first time, really.
Yes.
Where he's now taking on the role of chief of security, and it almost feels like they're just pushing that properly now.
Quite quickly as well, when you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, Tasha died, at this point, 6 episodes ago? 5 episodes ago? In the, list, when you look at the list of episodes. So, because I don't really recall at the end of season 1, they make a big thing saying, he is now the security officer. He just kind of still hovers around the back there, and there's kind of a rotating group of people that man the sort of horseshoe station. I think.
Yeah. And then you've got this whole thing that, obviously they're doing some kind of training scenario thing. There's no problem with the fact that he almost tried to attack a superior officer.
Yeah, and there's a pattern where if someone yells a Starfleet thing at him, then he kind of calms down. I remember the very first episode of Next Generation is like, we should totally separate the ship and escape. And he says, Worf. He tells Worf he's going to command the saucer. So, and he says, I'm a Klingon, sir. If I was to seek escape while my captain goes to the bounty, and Picard just yells at him, you're a Starfleet officer, Lieutenant. and then he just goes, "Oh, yes, sir." So it's the same thing here, where Riker just basically yells at him, doesn't he? And he calms down. Riker doesn't, like, to his credit though, he doesn't like run off. He just sort of stands his ground, and I think that probably creates some more respect for him in the eyes of Worf. I don't know if that's what they're trying.
Yeah. Worf would definitely see that as a more honourable way of dealing with it, and certainly a more respectful way of dealing with things.
Yeah, exactly. So. And in a way, it's almost like they couldn't think of what they wanted to have as the main storyline. They couldn't think of a good teaser before the credit.
It also just seems like they're just trying to do the art of deception, which is what comes up continuously through this episode. So the antagonist does to the crew as the writers do to us.
I mean, it is good though. It is a good start. It's entertaining for starters. I think it's it shows a bit of what Worf could be like, and it gives you a bit of depth to his character and their relationship. Yeah, it's good, but nothing to do with the episode, really, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and there still hasn't been that much holodeck stuff yet at this point. So it's still, they're still showing off this cool technology and things. Yeah. But before we get to all of that, they start to go to investigate an intermittent area of blackness. This hole in space. And I thought it was actually hilarious when Riker kind of points at the screen and goes, "There it is," and they look, and it's just the normal star field.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's like there's the blackness of space right there.
Yeah, it's like you say, oh well, that's just actual space. It's like you see this.
It is a void.
That's loads of like dots that are sort of glistening against a black background. That's just space, dude. That's like.
but we do get to this kind of big amoeba-like looking hole.
Yeah.
So they do end up showing it. It looks more like a cloud.
Yeah.
And I do love the fact that Data doesn't know what it is, and Picard's kind of questioning him, and he's just kind of like, be able to discover knowledge is be able to start with pointing out, I do not know.
Yeah.
That worked really well, I thought.
It made for a slightly comedic sort of moment without trying too hard to be comedic, but it's kind of selling that this is a really unusual thing that they've stumbled across quite strongly, I think, and made you curious as the viewer, to see what the hell this thing is that they've encountered in space. Really,
and it's good that they don't just have something to just explain it away straight away.
No.
Like, we're picking up this, we're picking up that. It's like they don't pick up any energy readings. There's no matter. There's nothing. As far as they're concerned, the only thing that shows that it's there is just their eyesight.
Exactly. And then, so, they launch a probe into it and it just dies. So that's like the plot thickens.
Yeah. And then and then Worf recommends that they switch to yellow alert, and Picard just goes, "Why?
Yeah.
Explain."
Really puts him on the spot.
And then they fire a second probe, and then Worf recommends that they fire a photon torpedo.
It's just, it's just, and you've got all the tropes right there. You've got Picard shooting him down, wanting to go to, go to the full, like, let's try and destroy them. And although Worf actually does say he had reason to be, let's get to yellow alert and be super cautious about it and defensive.
Yeah,
because he thought it reminded of a Klingon legend of a black like alien that can devour whole ships. And they just kind of look at it and they kind of go, oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, there was an original series episode which had something like that, and they had, was it the Voyager episode Bliss? I think that had something similar going on as well.
There was the void, wasn't there? Where they went in, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, when they went into a void. There's a lot of voids in Star Trek, I guess.
Well, there's nothing scarier than a void within a void. So
that's a double void, isn't it? Void.
Void squared.
Void squared again. That's a good name for an episode, that, potentially. So yeah, they obviously, they launch the two probes. They just disappear into nothingness. So the plot sort of thickens. It actually reminded me a little bit of there's elements of this episode in The Cloud and also The Phage of Voyager.
Yeah,
which is another thing where they go into something and are really confused by what's in it or encounter it, and they can't really, and they when they go to investigate it, stuff goes down. So I got shades of that, having recently watched those two Voyager episodes, though obviously they came after this episode. But yeah, there was sort of shades of that. And I think they just they kind of creep up on it a bit more, don't they? They kind of try to sort of get a bit closer to it.
And then this is when we get to the point that made me hate Pulaski as a kid, because this was her second episode.
Of
So
course,
she'd already been in once.
yeah.
But one of the characters that I loved most and respected the most as a kid was Data.
Oh, yeah.
And she is a bitch to Data.
Yeah.
She just does, to her credit, she does acknowledge that she's wrong and that she is struggling to try and come to terms with the fact that he is classified as a living thing.
Slightly grudgy, I have to say, which is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, if we were to parallel to modern day, it's kind of like how we have different pronouns and, people who are very stuck on, finding it difficult to transition to the fact that people have pronouns other than he or she, the other ones as well.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like that difficulty there. So
Stubborn.
it's one of those things where it does resonate a little bit more today, I think, than it perhaps did then. But just how dismissive she is of Data, talking about him in the third person whilst he's there. I just, that really put me off her character when I was a kid.
I don't know what the point of writing her like that is. I mean,
No.
you'd also think this is the 24th century. People would be pretty chilled out about things that aren't just a human, So why isn't she like that with Walker?
Yeah.
That's not a robot. It's a robot thing it seems to have. Yeah.
And you want a new character to be liked, and they introduce this new character, and she is not likable at all in that regard.
They're not setting her up to be liked, are they, really, with that sort of attitude?
No. But Data does have this brilliant idea of leaving a beacon behind. I thought that was pretty cool. And you even see Riker kind of just slightly out of focus behind Picard, kind of just smiling, kind of like, that's actually a really neat idea, Data. Where they just leave this beacon so they can figure out how far away that they've gone from it to give them a point of reference in this void.
So at this point, they're in there, aren't they? It's like enveloped them.
Yeah, and they're trying to escape, and they just have no way of knowing that they're even moving.
Yeah.
So we'll put a beacon behind us, and then we'll know that we're moving because we've got a reference point that then appears directly in front of them.
Yes, and it's just at this point you have no, as like a viewer, especially if you're watching it the first time, you've got no idea what this thing is. It's just really good. The suspense is built up nicely. It's not doing anything super blatant, or it's just really subtle and slow. And I think that's really well. And everyone's just baffled. There's, they can't scan it. They can't do anything. All of this, technology isn't really helping them at all. They're down to basically just looking at stuff with their own eyes. And that's really cool.
And then the first thing that they are able to detect is a vessel decloaking, and it's a giant Romulan warbird appearing in front of them.
Yes.
And I think you'll probably agree that on a first watch through, you think, okay, maybe the Romulans do have, either the Romulans have something to do with this, or they are caught up in it as well.
It's a really...
But either way, you're kind of... Yeah. But otherwise, you're kind of like, oh no, we're in trouble. But they're destroyed with a single photon torpedo, and there's no debris. And so you very quickly click in with, okay, so this is something else that's going on here.
Yeah, and what's hilarious about that is, like, they fire one photon torpedo and it blows up. And then, like, Geordie goes like, yeah. Like that was clearly going to happen because we're just really cool, Like,
very, very satisfied.
Flag, you'd be like, that clearly shouldn't have happened. There's something going on. But Geordie was happy to accept that they were just badasses and just up a wrong elbow with one torpedo.
Yeah, and he's still spending a lot of time on the bridge because obviously he was a bridge officer before becoming chief engineer.
Yes.
And here he is, chief engineer, but he's still taking his station at the back of the bridge. There's most of this episode is filmed on the bridge.
Yeah, nearly the whole thing, and a couple of corridors and transporter room, really, yeah.
And there's another vessel that's just about to appear at this point. And I think we see more of the other vessel's interior than we do of the Enterprise.
Yeah, which is funny because, well, the ship that turns up, although initially what you see is a Galaxy-class starship. And I'm like, oh my God, is this another Enterprise? And I think probably the first time I saw the episode, I think that's probably what I thought. And then obviously, we know that there are other Galaxy-class starships. I think, like, I've got the Star Trek Next Generation technical manual, and it goes into detail about that. I think there's like 6 of them or something were made initially. There's Enterprise, obviously. and there's the USS Galaxy, because the ship is not, the class of ship is named after the first ship they build.
Yeah.
So there was a USS Galaxy that was built that's slightly older than the Enterprise, and the whole class became the Galaxy class. I think the Enterprise was either the second or the third one built.
Yeah, the Yamato was the sister ship.
Yes,
with a very interesting registry as well.
that's complete,
because it was
gets ruined like when we know what the convention is later on for that. Yeah, what does it?
Well, not really. It's not really ruined, but it's the NCC 1305E, which means there have been a lot of USS Yamatos at this point.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, granted, we're on the Enterprise D, so it's only one more, but you know that there's been quite a lot of Yamatos.
I say Yamato and you say Yamato. What's to say to that? And it appears again, funnily enough, later on. So this isn't the last time we see it, although
No.
this is more interesting at this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, and at this point, the bridge is identical to the Enterprise's bridge, whereas it's slightly different in the next episode we see it. But that's perfectly reasonable because this is an illusion that's been created based on the Enterprise. So it kind of makes sense that as an illusion that it would have the exact same bridge and there aren't the differences that we see later on.
And I think at this point, like, Troy has kind of established that there is some kind of consciousness going on in the background here, manipulating things. So they're a little bit more clued up as to what they're up against. But the Yamato has turned up, and they obviously go over to it to see if they know what's going on, because they can't pick up any life signs. But a funny, kind of significant thing is they obviously go to the transporter room, and Chief O'Brien's the transporter chief. Now, I can't remember if that's, I think maybe the previous episode, the episode of season 2 is the first time we see him as the transporter chief. But I don't think he's got a name yet. They don't mention. Do they say O'Brien in this episode? I think they do, don't they?
Oh, I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure they call him O'Brien. He doesn't have Miles as his name yet. That comes in later, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that he is known as but although he's known as lieutenant in this one, they hadn't quite got the enlisted rank sorted for him. This is one of those ones where they call him Lieutenant O'Brien.
That's this whole saga, isn't it, where his rank goes down throughout the years.
Yeah, he's like an ensign, then he's a lieutenant, and then he's, I think he goes back down to ensign again at some point. He gets a demotion, and then he's not even ever been enlisted. He's just a chief petty officer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a whole thing on its own.
poor Harry Kim, doesn't budge from ensign like his whole career on Voyager, and
they're just dishing out ranks to O'Brien.
Yeah, Chief O'Brien bouncing around, but it's not the he appeared in season 1. He's in the very first episode of Next Generation. And he's in the episode Lonely Among Us. And he might be in another one, but at least
this was definitely his 4th episode.
Yes, it's his 4th at least. I think it probably is his 4th actually. So it's
because it was Lonely Among Us, and then he was in The Child. He was in the one just before.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think transported. Yeah, but there would be there was still a bit of a merry-go-round. Like there's one episode where Terry Hatcher, like literally Lois Lane, and in What's Her Name, Desperate Housewives, is a transporter chief, which I completely forgot about until I saw it a few years ago. I was like, holy, Terry Hatcher was in Star Trek. Holy crap! So there's a bit of a merry-go-round until Chief O'Brien. Like still pretty much nearly always Chief O'Brien from this point on. But yeah, so we get Chief O'Brien, which is cool. We all love Chief O'Brien, and yeah, they beam over. But it's again, the great thing about a show like this is, it's basically a bottle show, but it doesn't feel like it, does it? Even though it just takes place on the Enterprise, really, and special effects.
I mean, if anything, it uses the nature of it being a bottle show to its advantage because they are kind of trapped and stuff, and it really, especially this early on in the show. There's just brilliant, and this is just before they go down to the transport room. There's just this brilliant back and forth between Picard and Riker, and you really get this sort of sense that they are completely gelled together in terms of supporting each other on the ship.
Yeah, you really feel like this is a well-oiled machine, don't you? You can tell why they were chosen to be the command crew of the flagship of Starfleet, because they can just problem solve. Like there's no arguing. They just really sort of or like you just trust in their ability to work their way out of stuff and work stuff out. You can just feel it from the
Yeah.
way they act. The acting is just great, even in an episode like this, where nothing much well, quite, I want to say nothing much happens, but there's no big battles or anything or huge drama.
Mm.
It's a really cool, self-contained show.
Yeah, there's those silly moments every now and then, but everything else is just top notch.
Yeah,
And we have Riker and Worf beaming aboard, and again, you feel there's that sense of trust there that they'll just go in like and separate off into their own different directions, and then they both come running after each other. Like Worf is coming to try and save Riker because he hears Riker scream, but we blatantly with Riker hear Worf scream.
there's actually a great
And
moment when just as they
yeah,
beam over, actually, that I nearly forgot about, where like Worf says, "Oh, I thought the best plan would be to surprise them and beam to the back and end of the bridge or the aft like left like turbo lift or something."
mm,
And Riker's like, "You're assuming they're like hostile. We're not picking up any life signs." And Worf just says, "Well, the tactic is still sound." And it was,
yeah,
Riker's like, "Yes, you're right." So that's one example of let's do kind of action type stuff that might not be necessary that Worf suggests actually is a good idea. And they acknowledge that.
yeah. And when they get onto the bridge, one of the things that I thought was really clever was that if you listen, because you've got the bridge ambient noise that we're all very used to. Back then, we probably weren't as used to it. Now we've watched this so many times,
Yeah.
it's kind of ingrained there that it becomes really noticeable that the Yamato's bridge noise is so different. There's kind of this weird sort of tweaking to the sound, and it just sounds a little distorted. So it just gives you that sense of this isn't comfortable. There is something weird about this place, even before you see that there's another bridge through the conference room door.
And the way it's lit as well, like the corridor
Yeah.
walk down when they hear the screams that you mentioned. It's very dark, lots of shadows. None of the panels are lit or anything, so you already get a sense of this is just really weird. And then when they go on the bridge, again the eeriness with I think it's lit a lot darker. Obviously, it's just the Enterprise. I mean,
Mhm.
you could, they can get away with it because the Yamato is a Galaxy class ship, so it's obviously everything looks the same. It's funny because watching it in HD, which I did on Netflix, I actually saw there's a scene where you could just about see the dedication plaque, and I was actually going to.
Mm.
I didn't do this, but I was going to. God, I could probably pause it and I could see if they've actually bothered to replace it. Because my temptation is to say is they probably didn't because they didn't think anybody
Yeah.
would see it. I could be wrong; they might have done actually, but yeah,
And this is the thing about this episode, because if it was still the Yamato, um, but had the Enterprise plaque, you could still get away with saying,
yeah,
"Oh, well, it's part of the illusion because it's
yeah.
just a carbon copy of the bridge." You could get away with
It would create more creepiness and add to the mystery, really.
it. Yeah, and obviously not something that they themselves would be looking out for. So it would perfectly work even if that was the case, just because it is an illusion.
And there is like we kind of mentioned that the teaser felt like it didn't really fit with the rest of the episode, but the payoff, and it kind of makes sense now we're reviewing it and we can look back. It's you kind of get the payoff, or at least you get a foreshadowing in the teaser where Worf basically loses it. He gets super confused about, there's the moment where he really loses it is when they're walking down that corridor, and they're saying we need to get to the bridge. We need to get to a turbo lift. But when they open the turbo lift doors, they just go straight into the bridge, which obviously confuses the hell out of them. They're like, this should be 4 decks above us. And then when they
Hmm.
open another door, that just goes on the other side of the bridge, which should lead to like a conference lounge or something. Um,
Hmm.
I think it probably would have been the conference lounge. They just end up going to another bridge.
I love it when Riker's saying, "So where do we end up if we go through that door?"
Yeah,
And Worf just looks at him and just goes, "We'd be on the bridge."
yeah,
Just very matter of fact.
yeah.
It's like, I see a bridge there. We would be on the bridge.
And he's not wrong. They
No,
would be on the bridge.
no.
But the door's about to close on him as he's trying to walk onto this other random bridge that's next to the actual bridge or whatever it is. And he sort of grabs the doors and tries to force them open while they're trying to close on him. And he starts yelling, sort of Klingon expletives. And so the payoff from the teaser happens right here where Riker tells him to pull himself together because he's kind of losing it a bit, and then he eventually does, and then he sort of growls at Riker again, like he did in the teaser. But he sort of says to himself, "At ease, Lieutenant, at ease," and walk that to himself. He sort of mutters that to himself and walks off. So that's really the point of the teaser, was to kind of foreshadow that moment, and that's where the payoff, where maybe you see that he's learning self-control and stuff.
It is just the very first underpinnings of Worf, really. Where you really, I mean, I say underpinning, like we've had a season with him already, but this feels more like he's not so much a background character, that we're starting to get some characterization out of him more this season.
Yeah, because it would have been Tasha Yar that would have gone with Riker on that. Well, it was just a very small.
Yeah,
it was them two. So
yeah.
Worf wouldn't.
But here's one thing, because I'm trying to remember back, and I don't think I can. But Picard is really concerned about their safety when they're on the holodeck. I don't recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall him being at all worried about Riker and Worf being on this magical ship that's just appeared.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and presumably the safeties are on, unless like I said, we're confused about why he's so concerned about the being on the holodeck. It wasn't. It made for an interesting little moment with Picard, and it's kind of nice in a way that you see how he's concerned for his crew, but it's kind of a bit of a funny way to start. But yeah, he doesn't seem to care in the same way.
It would make more sense if Picard was still a little bit worried with them being over there on the other ship.
Yeah.
Whereas he doesn't seem to still have that kind of worry there, and there wasn't anything to reassure him so that he wouldn't be as nervous at this point. It's almost like we're just missing a little bit from it. But this is where we end up with our antagonist appearing. And I know that when you and I first met, I think that that this character is probably one of the people that you started bringing up quite a lot at the time.
I used to reference this loads because it's just so like random. I mean, it starts off with a very sort of weird game of cat and mouse, isn't it? At that point in time, there's a new random, like basically a red shirt has appeared on the bridge. He's literally a red shirt as well.
Ensign Haskell.
Yeah, Ensign Haskell. And he's there because obviously where is Wesley Crusher, actually? He doesn't go anywhere, does he? Why isn't Wesley there?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that he's maybe off duty, but everybody else is on the same duty shift with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's there for a little bit. He's there at the end of the episode. But yeah.
I know why.
Is he?
We'll see why.
Was he there at the beginning of the episode?
No, it was Crusher was there at the beginning, but they've had to very, very, very blatantly put this red shirt there because he's basically there for the reason why you have red shirts in Star Trek. So as we'll see, but yeah, so they start losing contact with the away team as well at this time. But while that's happening, a gap in this big cloud that they've been sucked into opens up, so they could actually escape through that and they'll be able to leave. But Picard doesn't want to go because he wants, he's concerned about. At this point, he gets really concerned about the away team and they're losing contact. But this Haskell, he's really eager just to cut and go. He's just like, "Oh, screw the away team! Look, we can go."
Yeah,
and he's like, "But sir, we can get out." And Picard's like, "No, we're going to wait for the frigging away team. What you come on?"
And then a giant face appears.
And then the giant face appears.
It is Nagilum.
Yeah,
it's a very creepy kind of like we've got this mouth, we've got these big eyes that are kind of stretched and distorted.
It's like a distorted giant face, isn't it? That's sort of part of the background of the cloud or nebula, like Erin.
Or as Geordie describes when they said that there's just nothing there, and he goes, "There's a big ugly nothing."
Yeah. He's good for that in this episode. Like he sort of does a funny, like, "Yeah, got you," and they blow up the Romulan warbird, and this he like does a funny little comment.
He does a comment about the rat and the cheese and saying, you can keep the cheese.
I'll just
get me out of the maze.
Yeah, yeah. So he's great for those little quips. Like is that why he's there? It doesn't really do much. In fact, it doesn't really contribute anything apart from to tell them that they're at warp, really, which is kind of
And then we have this thing where Nagilum knows all the crew's names, which is starting to freak people out the more that he kind of goes through the list.
Yeah, he just announces them. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he identifies Pulaski as being different to all the rest when, and then it's made clear that she's a female.
Yeah.
And Troy is stood there. There's no reference to the fact that, like, okay, we've got two people who are different. It's just like, "Oh, Pulaski, you're different to everybody else in the room." including Troy.
Yeah, so it's like, pretty sure Troy's a female, could be wrong, but and yeah, he kind of Nagilum, so he appears, and he sort of we can see, now we know there's a force behind all of these weird like occurrences and having the Enterprise trapped. It's this giant face called Nagilum, and I mean, you could almost like at this point maybe you might have suspected it could have been Q, that was doing this sort of thing, because he would have he liked to mess around with the Enterprise crew. I mean, only been 2 episodes at this point. The first and then like the 5th episode, or no, it's more than like the 8th episode, isn't it, when he comes back?
Yeah, this is very far on into the episode at this point, though,
Yes.
and Q likes people to know that he's the one messing with them. He'll play around for a little bit, and then he wants them to know. Whereas this has been quite a long time of just these weird things happening.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I think you're probably right. I think he would appear fairly quickly to do stuff in person. But yeah, Nagila.
Once he's also discovered about the existence of females and that males and females propagate for the expansion of the species.
Big time.
He asks for a demonstration
From Pulaski.
And she's like, I absolutely will not. Understandably.
Not likely.
Yeah.
Leave her words.
Yeah, not likely.
So again, that's another kind of funny, I don't know if it's supposed to be funny or not moment, but it kind of a dark comedy moment, isn't it? I think would be the way you describe that. I mean, he's only got to go and look at I mean, if you're that powerful, dude, go and just look at the computers. The library computers on the Enterprise, and then you can read about. I'm sure there's plenty of holodeck programs.
Just replay every holodeck program that Riker has used.
Oh yeah, we know
that'd be enough there.
Maybe some of those Cold War as well. We don't know, but
and of course he's immortal, so he then takes interest in what mortality is like. So that's when he's like, "You exist, and then you cease to exist," and he proves this by killing Ensign Haskell.
So yeah,
Haskell kind of curls up into a ball and dies.
Which is, I mean, he's sort of like, it looks like he's having, I wouldn't even say it's a fit. He just sort of like, looks like he's listening to some really loud music that's really irritating him, and it gets louder and louder. And then he sort of falls off his chair and he just dies. And basically it's clear, also they couldn't have Wesley do that. So they had to put this no-name, well, he had a name at least. So they had to put this poor guy, who was just happily getting on, with his Starfleet duty. Nagilum sort of sacrifices him so we can see what it's like for someone to die.
Yeah, and then says that the experiment is likely to take a third of the crew, maybe even half.
Yeah.
To which obviously Picard isn't happy with this, decides to self-destruct the ship. And then there's this interesting question from the computer when he and Riker are down in engineering. The computer asks for the time interval. And he's like, well, how long to prepare to die? Turns out the answer is 20 minutes. 20 minutes is how long is the right amount of time to prepare to die.
Yeah, they don't really debate it. It's not much of a debate. Sort of Riker just throws that out there. Yeah, 20 minutes. And God just...
Yeah. Enough time for this, enough time for that. 20 minutes. It's a nice balance between the two.
Would seem like we've had a self-destruct of some kind numerous times, but now, I mean, the Enterprise, the Next Generation, I think it happened once before in the first season, and obviously Star Trek 3, of course, and I think there was it Let That Be Your Last Battlefield on TOS was the episode where they set the self-destruct on the original Enterprise. So it happens quite a lot in Star Trek. This is the second time it's happened, but yeah, it really raises the stakes, because obviously Nagilum threatens. He wants to learn more about death, so he says, "I'm going to kill a third of your crew." They try to work out what can they do to get out of this situation. All of them are fairly resigned to sort of say, "Well, I think we're screwed here, guys." But Picard says, "No, there's one option," and they're like, "Oh, what?" And he's like, "Well, I'd blow up the ship."
and then he uses his 20 minutes to like just go back to his quarters, and I had to look this up because I was curious what the music was that he was listening to, and it's by a French composer called Eric Satie. So I kind of like that they chose a French piece of music, which was very fitting. But he's in there, and then Troy comes in to tell him that he's wrong, which is a little bit more tactful than Lily was in First Contact.
Yeah.
When she was trying to encourage him to blow up the ship, you got Troy very calmly saying, "Don't blow up the ship. That's wrong." And then Data comes in, and I just love how he's just like, "What is death?" Because like, "Oh, is that all?"
Very unsubtle.
Yeah, and then we get into this whole kind of, well, there's two philosophies: there's heaven or there's nothingness. And
Yeah.
and Dave's asking, well, what do you believe? And he says, well, I believe it should be something that's greater than both philosophies. And we were talking last week with Threshold that they were trying to make it sound smart by saying like the past is the future and the future is the past, and it was just nonsense. This is actually very smartly written.
Yeah.
This is actually proper intelligent stuff, and Picard doing what Picard does best, which is talking about philosophy and things, which Data always gave the perfect opportunity to do. Although we then find that this isn't actually Data, that Troy and Data are just Nagilam's own manifestations at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting actually the way they do that, because obviously Picard, like you say, very eloquently explains, the various philosophies and things that might happen, when you die. Obviously, we know that no one's any the wiser in the 24th century about that. But when he's doing that, it does cut to Troy a couple of times, and Troy has a very vacant look on her face. So they're obviously trying to sort of, show that this isn't the real Troy. It's like a facsimile or whatever it is. So I think even when the first time you watch it, that does make you think, it's a bit weird. She's not looking very like Troyish, which is, quite caring and nice and a bit emotive, without necessarily just in her face. She's got that, an emotive face, and, but very robotic. They cut to her a couple of times, and she's very robotic looking, and so's Data is a robot, but yeah, even he shows emotion in his face. So you can already feel a weirdness about the situation, and Picard twigs straight away that they're both some kind of facsimile that Nagilum has created to try and get Picard to turn off the self-destruct, and Picard works it out because he's obviously a bit of a legend, and is it's not going to work, Nagilum, and they just kind of vanish. They kind of disappear. It does make you think, like, so everybody's still on the bridge. Did Picard say when they set the soldiers, I'm just going to sit in my room and read a book? Are you guys all right?
Listen to music. Yeah.
It's only 20 minutes dead, right? So, so that would kind of cross my mind.
Normally you think that he would be on the bridge,
Yeah,
as a final thing,
because there's a good example of that in the Voyager episode Deadlock, where
yes,
one of the two Voyagers, there's two Voyagers in this episode. People don't know about it. One of the two Voyagers has to set a self-destruct before it gets taken over by the Vidians, who go around trying to steal everyone's organs. And they set a self-destruct, and when the Vidians get to the bridge, they can see that there's a countdown. And Captain Janeway very calmly welcomes them to the bridge, and they're all just sitting in their positions waiting for the clock to go down. And it does, and the duplicate Voyager blows up. Just ruined that episode for people. Sorry. Hey, it's been out years. Tough. But yeah, that shows that probably everybody's just going to hang out on the bridge, and I don't know. It's kind of a weird scenario, right? But yeah, that crossed my mind. That was kind of a funny one. But yeah, anyway, he goes back to the bridge, doesn't he? He gets told that they're out of this big cloud thing. Everything's fine now.
And what's kind of neat is that they've got the red alert is going, and this is, to my knowledge, I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first time they had the red alert lights blinking. They used to always just be stationary on. You would see that even in movies like Star Trek 3. You would have just on the bridge, it would just be like a solid red light.
Yeah.
But this was the first episode where they had them blinking, and then from that point on, they would be blinking all throughout.
And another, probably the final interesting fact about this episode, the character Nagilum, the voice of Nagilum is a chap called Earl Bowen. And you'll probably know Earl Bowen as Dr. Silberman from the Terminator films, the doctor that we mainly know as keeping Sarah Connor in an insane asylum.
Yeah, you messaged me about that the other day, and I did not know this at all until you mentioned it. So when I was rewatching it, it's just kind of like it's actually really. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a stereotype for him now, But
Exactly.
it's almost fitting. Just the way that he talks to the crew is very similar to how he kind of talks down to Sarah Connor.
He's very good in this episode as well, actually. That like Nagila is very creepy. He's not being over the top with it or putting on a really dramatic evil voice. Just a very creepy,
Yeah,
like doesn't care voice.
it's nothing about ego like you would get with Q.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, he's just trying to conduct an experiment, and he deems humanity then to be too hostile and too aggressive, and that there's not enough in common to really pursue anything further. But at least acknowledges to Picard that when Picard mentions that they have curiosity in common, he's like, okay, well, you do at least have a point there, you know. And it does come across as a scientist, but just without the compassion there.
Well, just before we get to that very final bit, it does actually end quite. There is quite a bit of tension because the self-destruct is still on, and Picard gets back to the bridge. He hasn't turned it off, and so they're literally all on the bridge. And I think Picard says, "Just go to warp 6, like any heading," and they go to warp. And Picard just is like, basically, he's not convinced that Nagilum has let them go. He thinks that this is an illusion as well. And he literally and everyone's just looking at him like, turn off the friggin' self-destruct, we're all good. And Riker's literally like, Captain, look, I think we're clear. Can we turn it off now? And Picard's just like, no, just wait. And the clock literally runs to about the last 5 or 6 seconds. And then he says, and then he just very, very abruptly says, computer, terminate self-destruct.
Yeah, so the computer asks Riker to confirm. And so Riker's like, yes, absolutely, you know,
wholeheartedly,
unequivocally. And Picard just listening going, a simple yes would have sufficed, number one.
Yeah, exactly. Another really great, like, dark comedy, like, moment. Yeah, and so yeah, the self-destruct's turned off, and as you say, he goes into his ready room, but it ends very abruptly. Like, he's just like, "Yep, cool, that's it, all good now." You know, they could have easily been zapped back into that thing as soon as he flipped off the self-destruct. But anyway, he goes back into his ready room, and Nagilum talks to him through his laptop, which is kind of an interesting way. It did make me notice, though, watching it in HD, I kind of feel like the Nagilum effect isn't as good as it was in the original. I don't know why, but if you look at the HD version versus the original, his mouth is really like doesn't move much. I don't know if they really struggled to recreate the effect, but in the sort of original, it was kind of almost like a human mouth that kind of moved normally. But in the HD version, very like rigid sort of thing.
Yeah, and it does seem like they were trying to do CGI with this, like with the way that everything was distorted and stuff. And so it was certainly very early on in that, and they definitely made the effect for television, for low resolution. And so when it got scaled up, I think you really see the limitations because of what they were producing it for at the time. And it's one of the few effects that doesn't hold up. Plus, to the credit of the people who made the show back then, the team that did the HD remastering was a different team for season 2.
Oh,
so the colors aren't quite as good. The HD remastering wasn't as good. And then for season 3, they got the original team who did season 1 back involved. And so that's why those are just really good. But yeah, season 2 has a much darker visual tone, and just is because it's a different company doing it. And they didn't do as good of a job.
The color grading's close to the original. Oh, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think the effect was good, but yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I thought it was a great premise. I thought it did feel like fall short at the end, because there wasn't much Nagilum in it compared to other entities that have done similar things in later shows. I feel that they could have done with more time. I think the 45 minutes really limited it because the pacing was great. As you were saying before, like it's all slowly building up. And I think the pacing is good, but they just run out of time. But I don't know if there's enough there for it to have been a 2-parter. I think that would have been too long for it.
It's probably about right. I mean, like Nagilum shows up like when there's probably about 15 minutes left.
That's it. Yeah.
You have the one big scene when he shows up initially and says everyone's name and tells Pulaski to have sex and all that stuff. And that's basically it until like the end, really. Yeah, when he shows up on the laptop.
Yeah. You kind of get the answer as to who's doing this, but you don't really get to learn much about him,
No.
and you don't get to learn more the motivations. I think that you get. There was a much better job done in other episodes, like Voyager's scientific method,
Oh, yeah.
where that again is the crew under an experiment.
Similar ending as well.
Yeah, but you do get to find out more the motivations behind the people who are doing this. I do wonder if they put Nagila in earlier, would it have ruined the pacing more?
I would probably say Scientific Method is a better version of this episode than this one is.
Yeah.
Because like the Nagilum and antagonist character are people that they can actually talk to, and are fairly creepy and and also completely don't care. So I would say,
It feels more invasive as well in Scientific Method.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and potentially just as deadly, as well, but in a much slower way. Which is so I would say that succeeds a bit better. That's not to take anything away from this episode because this did it first. Maybe that I don't
Yeah.
know if I read the Star Trek Voyager Companion, I've got that as well. Maybe they'll reference Where Silence is Lease as being like an inspiration. But yeah, and probably the ending is done a bit.
It was a different writer and director.
Yeah,
So I don't know if but certainly it's one of those ones you would kind of look back and potentially be inspired by it.
yeah,
Sure.
and I think probably the way that Janeway, instead of just setting the self destruct, which you probably could have done in that episode, really, she flies it towards like a pulsar or something and threatens to blow it up that way. Yeah, but I don't know. Like the self destruct, I think probably works better in this episode because of the way Picard leaves it till the last few seconds. I mean, Janeway does that in Scientific Method, but it's like it's just a countdown, which is kind of creepier to me than just them blowing up from getting too hot. But yeah,
And I like that you almost get the sense of danger from Riker because he doesn't give this kind of feeling of like, oh, I knew we were going to be okay. You can tell that he was like, oh, we're going through with this. This is something that will more than likely happen, and he is so relieved when it's done. But at the same time, he doesn't counteract those orders, which we know that that's the whole thing, that you wouldn't do that publicly on the bridge.
no,
That's something that you would only ever have a conversation within Picard's ready room in private. But at no point does he disagree with Picard's order.
and that's kind of when like Wesley touches upon it in a way, doesn't he? When he says to Riker, like, "Wow, you really held out that bluff till the last second," and Riker was like, "Was he bluffing?" And Data gives
Yeah.
a look, like, bloody hell, yeah, good point. But like you said, like how the whole crew is just a well-oiled machine. They obviously Riker did strongly suggest to him, like, can we turn off the self-destruct? I think we're okay. He didn't really lose his cool or was like, we're gonna die. And no one did. It just shows what a brilliant crew they are, and they're you would just trust them with everything. You trust them as a viewer to do the right thing because they're that good. So yeah, I think that episode, I give it a big thumbs up. I mean, what would you thumbs up, thumbs down for you?
Thumbs up, yeah. No, I do. I do really like it. Yeah, certainly some quirky bits here and there, but overall, very very strong, especially for season 2.
One of the best episodes so far up to that point, I would say. Actually, when you've got season 1, it's
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, season 2 ended up in a writer's strike, and they were starting to reuse scripts from the aborted Star Trek Phase 2. But this one, I'm pretty sure, was, just straight up. This is a whole new thing, and written just really well.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah, I think just being limited to normal TV programming where they've got to do 45 minutes and not a minute more, I think was probably the only thing that may have hampered it.
They literally managed to cram everything in, didn't they? Right to the end. But yeah, and anybody sort of we touched upon the Voyager sort of equivalent episode. That's a good episode as well for anybody looking for a Voyager episode to watch. Check that out. Very similar to Silence as Lease. But that was our second episode of Long Range Sensor. So thank you for hanging out with us. If you do have any questions for us or want to get in touch, you can reach us via Twitter at Star Trek LRS. We've got a website, longrangefences.com. And you can actually email us as well if you've got any questions. That's at longrangefences@icloud.com. You can also discuss this episode if you would like to continue the conversation on our exclusive private Discord channel by joining the crew of the USS Atlantic at patreon.com/long range sensors. On Patreon, you can choose from our science, operations, and command division tiers. They give you exclusive benefits. And for a limited time, if you want to join Cosmic, Leewas, Sunu, and mini packs on our founding members tier, then you get both lifetime access and an exclusive role on our Discord channel. You'll also get a permanent website credit and a shout out on the first few episodes of the show. These are exclusive benefits, though. They're limited to the first 10 people, which at the time of recording leaves us with just 6 left. So get on those rewards.
Yeah, we've also got some excellent community-based goals lined up, which every support tier will be eligible for, which will include live recordings of the show, special one-off Trek lifestyle episodes, and more. Our next goal will be unlocked after we hit 15 patrons, which will allow us to start producing extended editions of the show for you to enjoy.
And of course, if you want to help but aren't able to contribute financially, that's absolutely fine too. If you enjoy listening to the show, please tell a friend, share it on social media, transmit it to a loved one via Subspace. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to share our content. It goes a long way to help the show reach even more people. So I'm Trev. You can follow me at Henry Jones Jr. on Twitter. I actually have another podcast about retro and modern video gaming with my co-host Stu, and that's over at consoleshock.net. Al, where can people find you?
Well, everyone can find everything I'm up to at alistairmcfly.com. You can follow me on Twitter at both Alistair McFly and at iMcFly. And if Twitch streams are your thing, then you can also check out my channel where I stream Minecraft, Among Us, and alternate between classic Star Trek and Star Wars games over at twitch.tv/Alistair McFly.
You've been listening to Long Range Sensors, and in the spirit of Riker, if you encounter any holes, steer clear.